Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast. We're an e-combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page, host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. I'm Brian Page, founder of Modern Husbands. Sometimes our listeners want more support than a podcast can give, individual or couple support, which I provide as a certified financial therapist, accredited financial counselor, and fair play facilitator. Details can be found at modernhusbands.com. Today we welcome Dr. Mikel Van Cleve. Mikel earned his Ph.D. in personal financial planning at Texas Tech University, where he specialized in blended family financial dynamics. His research deepens our understanding of how complex family structures, particularly blended families, achieve financial well-being. In this episode, we unpack why estate planning is especially critical for blended families, the emotional conversations couples often avoid, and offer practical advice for navigating fairness, conflict, and long-term financial decisions as a family. Enjoy the show. Well, congratulations, Dr. Van Cleve, for, defending your dissertation? Did I say that the correct way?
You did. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I know you and Dr. Ross are going to have lots of commentary between you because you both have gone through this. But I think that, for listeners who are joining in, this is a treat because there's very little research around how blended families manage money. And you are the expert, right? And so the topic of the conversation is going to be just that. But there's a little bit more to it than that. Can you share with our listeners a little bit more about your PhD focus?
Yeah, I sure will. And Brian and Dr. Ross, thank you so much for having me on the show today. Always a pleasure to be part of the Modern Husbands podcast. But yeah, so my focus for my PhD, it's really on the intersection of blended family relational dynamics and financial planning. And so it's looking at anything from the day-to-day money management routines that take place and how even simple things like, who's going to pay for that pair of shoes, or is it okay to get a cell phone when you've got to coordinate with, ex-spouses and other households and so forth, to building wealth, and then more complex things like estate planning. And so my dissertation specifically looked at a couple of more subjective financial measures, which was looking at financial satisfaction, as well as overall family life satisfaction, and then also looking at estate planning outcomes, which was really interesting. I definitely have some challenges to the profession, the policymakers, and so forth that are.
I definitely want to get into the estate planning outcomes that you found in your work, but can we back it up and just ask, where does this passion for blended families come from?
Yeah, so for me, I call it me search. I stole that term from someone else, but it's me search because I've sat on both sides of the table. So as a practitioner working with clients, being in the industry now for over a couple of decades, but then also being part of a blended family myself. And so my wife and I actually just celebrated our 10-year, what we call together-versary, because from when we had our first date, we actually met online. And there's been a lot that's happened over that 10 years. I kind of equate it to, in the corporate world, they use the term forming, storming, and norming, right? As you're creating teams and so forth. Very much like that in a blended family. And so what happened is when we first started, we first got married and we started to kind of blend and come together, we realized there were a lot more challenges than we had anticipated. Even having been in financial planning, there were just things I didn't think about because I didn't know about. And so I noticed, the industry wasn't really equipped to serve what is such a large portion of the population now. The traditional financial planning models, estate planning laws, and so forth, intestacy laws, as they're referred to, they are very much old-fashioned still, and focused on kind of that traditional nuclear type family where you've got a couple and their shared biological or legally adopted children. And the profession just really doesn't know how to handle and deal with the blended family dynamics. And so we saw this working with our own estate planning attorney, which was a very frustrating experience because she didn't understand the different relational dynamics and so forth that were involved. And even in the mental health profession, we were going through some of that forming, storming, and norming. And so we reached out to a couples therapist who advertised. She specialized in blended families, but not so much.
Not so much.
And so,
Not wasn't what you needed.
yeah, not so much. And so I started kind of looking into things like research that was out there and so forth, and realized, well, there's really not much. There's been a fair amount of research done in like the fields of psychology, even in evolutionary biology. There's some theories there that can help explain some of the differences, but not much in the financial planning space. And so that kind of fueled my passion to say, okay, what could I potentially do about this? So that led me into the insanity of doing a PhD in my, mid to late 40s now. But it's been exciting. I've learned a lot about my own family life as well going through this. I look forward to getting more of the me search and research out there to hopefully advance the profession and look at some potential policy changes.
Well, I mean, yeah, as you said, that's the great thing about me search is that you get to actually focus on, the things that are affecting you personally and the things in your life. There really is kind of a lack of financial practitioners as well as like mental health therapeutic practitioners that really know how to address these families.
Correct.
Or the challenges, the barriers, the issues that come up with these families.
Right.
So let's dive into that. So you said there were challenges that even you experienced. Why is estate planning so important for blended families?
Well, it's important for a couple of reasons. One, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the majority of intestacy laws across the various states do not recognize step relationships. And so what that means is that, so if you die intestate, you don't have a will or trust set up to kind of establish what you want to happen, then it's going to follow the old-fashioned rules where in most cases, things are going to go to a surviving spouse. And then from there to your spouse's surviving children, which means that if you had shared children together, okay. But if you had children from a prior relationship, those are your spouse's stepchildren. And those intestacy laws are not going to recognize them, which means that you're going to potentially unintentionally disinherit your children. And that's a big deal, right? The other thing.
Would imagine so.
Yeah. The other thing is just the complexity that goes into trying to decide what is quote unquote fair in your blended family. And here it's really important to note that fair does not have to mean equal. And so what can happen in a lot of cases, right, is that you have one partner come into the relationship with more assets than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And more history with those children, right? With their own children than they have with their spouse. See, in a nuclear family, you form the partnership first and then the children follow. But in a blended family, there's history there already with the children. And so is it, again, quote unquote, fair that your new partner's children get as much as your children from a prior relationship if those assets were already grown and established, especially when that partnership forms later in life, right? And so I've kind of got the interesting angle of not only am I a blended family myself, where we did come into our partnership with unequal assets when the union formed, but also I am a stepchild. And so my dad remarried. He actually married his high school sweetheart, which is crazy, right? He and my mother had been divorced like 25 years. His high school sweetheart, her husband had passed, and they just happened to reconnect right before a high school reunion. And so technically she's my stepmother, but we've never lived together. I'm a grown adult. They've been married, I think, maybe 12 years now, something like that. And so it's different. And so do I expect her to leave me any assets? No. I don't. They should go to her children. My dad feels like his assets should go to his children and so forth. So those conversations have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And those conversations can be difficult. And when things are difficult, what do we sometimes do? Well, we avoid them. And so there's some conflict avoidance there that may take place, right? And because of that, we just don't do it.
So what are some of those reasons why families do avoid this conversation? The planning involved in it.
Yeah. I mean, just think about it. If you tell your spouse, I want more of my assets to go to my children than to your children, your spouse may feel like you don't love their children or that you don't care or love about them because you're prioritizing your own children over them and their children. And that's not a fun conversation to have. It's just not. There's a lot of favoritism or perceived favoritism anyway that takes place in a blended family, because again, you've got the history already with your children, you've got traditions, you've got norms. If the children are very young when the union forms, that's going to look a little different potentially than if the union forms when the children are adults, right? Or the children are teenagers. And so I use kind of a technical term, right? But there's a lot of heterogeneity in blended families based on when they form and the different dynamics and whether both have children, whether you have shared children or not, and so forth. And so that can get messy because there's a lot of emotions. And we all know we're all guilty of this. People don't talk to each other. Those emotions just kind of build up and we make assumptions, right? And so when there's perceived favoritism and things like that, it can make the conversations very, very difficult. When there's if there's an unequal balance there in assets, in debts, things like that, that's going to lead to, again, conversations around fairness. I had someone quote me in a blog. I never talked to them, but they were talking about some of this reason. You guys know how that happens, right?
Yep.
But they were telling a story about a couple who, they came in with unequal assets. One of the partners had a fair amount in 529s for their children. And the spouse felt like the assets, and we all know you can only have one beneficiary on a 529 and so forth. So all the technical things aside, the spouse felt like those 529 assets should be split up equally across all the children. They had nothing saved for their kids, right? And so the one who had those 529 aside said, well, hey, that's not fair. Why should my kids have to borrow money for college and take on student loan debt when I did plan for them, when I did save for them, when I did do what I needed to? It's not their fault you didn't. And you can imagine this conversation didn't go so well, right? It's not their fault that you didn't and that your children don't have any. That's a common feeling, right?
And I imagine it can even get more complicated if there are ex-spouses that are also weighing in on this conversation.
Yeah. And they're in a
quick question. Is it better in that circumstance to just simply say, rather than accuse or look at what your spouse did or didn't do, just to simply say, this was something that I told my children I would do, and I'm going to honor the agreement, and leave it at that?
Yes, that's what happens, right? But when emotions start getting involved and, we call it the crazy cycle, right? You start spinning out of control a little bit and things start to get a little bit more heated. It doesn't always come across that way or come out that way, right? I mean, that's just human nature. And so the reality is that, there's a lot of times conflict between spouses in a blended family or cohabiting partners because of things related to the children. And so when you get into the estate planning space, and potentially if there are a fair amount of assets, now you're dealing with much larger amounts, right, than just maybe what we're talking about with college funding or 529s, although that can be a lot now too, right? There can be some pretty heated discussions. The problem is in not doing it, and in the research that I've just done, that's what we see. The likelihood of having a will or trust is lower in blended families than nuclear families after controlling for different demographics, financial characteristics, and so forth, right? So even after controlling for those things, we see that. One might hypothesize.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah. You might hypothesize, right, that the likelihood would be higher because of the statutory incentives, right? Because the legal defaults essentially require it. If you don't do it, you potentially are disinheriting your kids. So you think it would be higher, and unfortunately, it's not. At least not within this analytic sample, right, within the study. And so there is an association there where the likelihood is lower. And that's important. And so, again, I couldn't directly measure all the reasons why that is the case. But based on other research, based on practitioner experience, personal experience, and so forth, conflict avoidance could be one of the reasons for that, right? It makes sense because the conversations are they're not easy to have. They're not fun to have because there's going to be the whole fairness and people just assume equal and fair are the same thing. But
yeah, I imagine going back to if you have ex-spouses, parents still of the blended stepchildren, right? In the picture. And if they're setting up, their own estate plans, fairness isn't always equal, right? Because You could have other spouses leaving more assets that they're going to continue to accrue through their life, which there could be huge differences between each side of the family, then, I would imagine.
Yeah, there is. And there typically is, and thanks for going back to that piece as well, because there typically is an ex of some sort involved, right? If you've got children coming in from a prior relationship, then, I mean, there are situations where the ex is kind of completely out of the picture for whatever reason, or it
Right.
could be that they passed away, right? And so but the majority of the time, blended families form after the divorce of a prior union, right? And so you've remarried, but you were previously in a union that ended it. And so there's some co-parenting if the children are younger that has to take place. Even if they're older, though, that may continue to some degree because you still have shared children with that ex, right? And so they get involved. And sometimes that involvement's not what you want. Sometimes it's great. Some people co-parent really well together, work through things well together, but, others do not. And then you have to also take into account that ex may also remarry.
Right.
Or they may remarry, divorce, and remarry again. And each one of those is kind of a disruption to that family system, right? It's another person coming into the picture, another person with their own ideals about how things should be done. That could create conflict as well. Now, specific to estate planning, to a certain extent, they don't have a say so much in your assets, but then again, they do. And what I mean by that is, so assets and custodialship. So if your children are minors, then this is tough. This is tough. This is another one of those areas where default policies fail us because step parents have no legal rights in the majority of cases to their stepchildren. Okay, they would have to go to court and say that I'm more fit to be their parent, or that I should still have some visitation or parental rights, shared custody of some sort, with their surviving biological parent. Hey, that's tough, right? Like you've got to basically kind of prove that you should still have that. Majority of the time, they're going to go to their biological parent. And if their biological parent does not like you, right, you were the step parent, you may not get to see those kids again. You really have no legal rights as a step parent for the most part. And so now I'm not an attorney. Each state's a little bit different, but for the most part, you just don't. And so how things are kind of set up and so forth. I mean, you can say in your will, that I want my current spouse or partner to take care of the child if something happens. And that may end up being the case if you and your ex both pass and the child's minor, but otherwise they're probably going to go to the biological parent. Also, asset wise, and this is another area that's important, is that if you're going to leave some things to a minor child, this is where, again, the estate planning component becomes so important because let's say you name your child as the beneficiary directly on a life insurance policy, or you set up a payable on death with a bank account or something like that, right? And you name the minor child. They can't pay assets out to a minor. Somebody's got to serve as the custodian over those assets until then. Do you really want that to be your ex-spouse? Probably not. But that could end up happening, right? Because they are that child's parent if you don't have your documents set up correctly. So there are a lot of consequences in blended families to not having your estate planning set up and set up correctly. How you name beneficiaries, what types of trust you put into place, how you specify different things within your will. Those are all very important. If there's one critical piece of advice I could give to everyone, it's please do not use an online program when you're in a blended family. You need to go see an attorney. I know it's not cheap, but the alternative is worse. You really need to go see an attorney and make sure things are drawn up correctly and try to find an attorney that understands blended families, which I know can be tough, but that's really what you want.
Listeners have told us that they love the ideas we share on our podcast to manage money in the home as a team, but want more help than one episode can provide. That's why I'm excited to announce On the Same Page Consulting for corporations, couples, and individuals. Visit modernhusbands.com and click Our Services at the top of the page to learn more about how I can help you or your employees manage money in the home as a team. Again, that's modernhusbands.com. Now back to the show.
Going to an attorney, what are the other tips you'd give blended families to ensure that they do address these critical areas?
Have a conversation. That's the most important thing. Sit down, Schedule a date if you have to, a money date, if you want to call it that, an estate planning date. Grab your favorite beverage and just sit down and have a conversation, but make sure it's a conversation. Don't go into it with preconceived notions or assumptions or you love your children more than you love me. Like, just get all that, try to clear all that out of your head and just sit down, be open and honest with each other, share your feelings, not blame, don't point the finger, but just, this is how I feel about certain things, and have that conversation in a very healthy manner and work through things. Because understand what you're feeling on your side of the table, they're feeling a different way on the other side of the table. If you're feeling unloved or that you don't matter as much, they're feeling frustrated probably and like, hey, you don't understand me and you don't understand that I have this history with my children. You don't understand that I would feel guilty if I didn't do these things for my children that I maybe have already promised or already planned to do. There's a lot of loyalty binds. We see that throughout kind of the psychology field research that's been done on blended families is those loyalty binds. And so you kind of feel tugged in both directions, right? But just have that conversation. And there's some tools out there. I know Dr. Brad Klontz and I know a lot of folks are maybe familiar with some of his work with the Klontz money scripts and work in the financial psychology space. But we did a paper that published. It is more of a theoretical piece. So you don't get bogged down with all the stats and stuff for those who aren't researchers. But we published that in the Journal of Financial Planning, and it was specifically on the psychology of estate planning and blended families. There's a conversation guide actually in that piece that couples can use, that practitioners can use with their couples to just kind of give them some guardrails and guide that conversation along so that it is healthy. But talk through it, figure out what you want. It's a long-winded way for me to say, figure out what you want. Get on this same page, determine what is fair in your blend. And that doesn't have to mean equal. That doesn't have to look the same as someone else's blend. But figure out what's fair in yours. Go see the attorney and get things set up. Make sure you have all your beneficiaries right and so forth. If you're in a community property state, even more so, this can be difficult, right? Everything's 50, half's going to your current spouse. And when you pass, it's going to their kids. I mean, that's a lot of times the way it happens. And so you got to figure things out. If you're not married already, talk to an attorney about a prenuptial agreement. I know those have a negative connotation. People see those as a plan to fail. If I get divorced, this is what I want to have happen, right? Prenups can help tremendously in a blended family upon death and how things happen. And so that's protecting assets. If you're already married, you can consider a postnuptial agreement. You can look at things like irrevocable life insurance trust to kind of equalize the estate, leave some things for your children. Qualified terminal interest property test, Q-tips. I mean, not to get too technical, but if you're a practitioner listening to these calls, those are the technical terms you already know. It's just understanding how to apply them within blended families and why they're so good.
Well, Dr. Van Cleve, obviously this is an issue that could require individual consultation at a minimum because everything is so complicated. So not to put you on the spot, but do you support folks who are going through this process and they need an expert to help them pull their finances in order?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question, Brian. What I actually do is I support the practitioners who are working with them. And so if they have a financial planner or estate planning attorney that they are working with, that financial planner or estate planning attorney can reach out to me. I have Van Cleve Consulting, and I will work with them directly to help ensure that they are addressing the things and helping that family work through and navigate through the complexities involved so that they do get the right plan in place. Because what good's a plan if it's not the right one, right? And obviously, you want your clients to take action, and they're not going to do that if the recommendations don't make sense for them. So I work more directly with the professionals so that the professionals can then help those clients and be better equipped to do so.
So if you're listening to this and you're wondering how is it that you can get expert advice from Dr. Van Cleve, knowing that you have a really complicated situation that needs addressed, if you just go to modernhusbands.com and you'll find my email address there, brian@modernhusbands.com, I can coordinate that. I'll take care of it. So again, modernhusbands.com, brian@modernhusbands.com, and I'll coordinate connecting you with Dr. Van Cleve. Now, with that said, Dr. Van Cleve, is there one piece of simple and actionable advice that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I've got two things. I appreciate it. For practitioners, challenge yourself to move beyond the traditional model. You have the technical knowledge. Spend more time getting to know the people. Before you start talking about all the technical things, get to know that blended family, understand the relational dynamics, understand what's fair for them, and you'll be so much better equipped to actually help them in a way that can make a difference. For consumers, it's simple. Don't wait. Don't allow disagreements and conflict and assumptions and assuming the worst and all these different things to keep you from doing it, because the alternative is it's not going to turn out the way you want, more than likely. If you want your children to receive anything from a prior relationship, it's not going to turn out the way you want. So don't wait. Get together, have that healthy dialogue and conversation, figure out what you want it to look like, then go see the financial professional and the attorney to get things set up.
Great.
Yeah, thank y'all. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Don't leave just yet. Be sure to like and subscribe before you do. And a reminder to visit modernhusbands.com if you're looking for money and home management support in your life. Just click the Our Services button at the top of the page. Again, that's at modernhusbands.com. And many thanks to our co-hosts, our guests, and of course, all of you for joining today.